Okay, in this video, I'm going to talk about iterations again. And you may say, what? Even more iterations? And the answer is yes, because, well, remember, a list is a sequence of the objects, right? And then if we have a sequence of objects, then the natural question is, how do we visit all the members in a list one by one? And what's that? That's iteration, right? So we still have to talk about iterations. Okay, and this is a very small example. We created a list of 4 integers. And our first task is we want to add all the values together into a variable called sum. And how do we do that? And remember, we can use the syntax like a for a control variable in a sequence, right? For example, say we have learned uh, for letter in my string, okay, and then I can print each of the letter, for example, right? Okay, so this syntax is nothing but for a control variable in a sequence, right? Okay, now we want to do something similar to a list, and we can do for I in X. What is X? X is a list, right? So in this setup, we can visit all the members in this list one by one. And since we have already got this set up, and what do we do to have everything add together? That's easy. For each value I we are visiting, we just add this I to the sum, and eventually after this iteration, we have all the numbers added to the sum. So sum will be the total of all the values in the list, right? And then let's do another one. How about we want to get the product of all the values in the list? And then can we start from 0? No, in this way we have to start from 1, right? And then we do the same thing for I in the X, and then product equals the product multiplied by I, and this is how we can get the sum or the product of all the values in a list. And remember this syntax. We used to have this syntax to visit all the characters in a string one by one. And now we are using almost exactly the same syntax to visit all the values or all the items in a list one by one. Okay? So here's another example. And on the top one, we created a list of strings. So a list of 3 strings. And then if we want to visit all the members one by one, and we can still do for I in AA, and then we print this I. Well, there's nothing surprising. The only difference is now we are using the same syntax, the same setup of the iteration to visit all the strings in a list. Well, we are visiting a list of strings. Okay, and how about next one? So for next one, our goal is we want to visit all the numbers, and our goal is we want to find the third value which is greater than 100. If there is a third value greater than 100, we print that. Otherwise, we say we don't have such value. This search is failed. Okay, so we start from a really long list, and then we are doing a count. Why? Because we are not looking for the first value greater than 100. We are looking for the third. So when you are visiting a value greater than 100, you got to have a way to know, is that really the third value greater than 100, right? So, well, we start the count from 0, and then for I in X, we know this. And if the current value we are visiting is greater than 100, and then we increase the count by 1, saying I have seen one more value greater than 100, right? And then when this count is exactly 3, this means we are visiting the third value greater than 100. So we say the third number greater than 100 is the current value I, and then we do a break. Why do we want to do a break? Because there could be even more value greater than 100, but I don't care anymore. As long as I have found the third value greater than 100, it's okay, I can stop. And otherwise, I'm doing else here. Why? Because if I have finished all the possible rounds in this for loop without triggering the break, what does this mean? I visited all the values, but still there's no third value greater than 100 yet. Probably there's only one value greater than 100, or there are two values greater than 100, or there's no value greater than 100. But anyhow, I have finished visiting all the values, but I have not been able to find the third value greater than 100. So I'm doing an else, and then I'm saying there's only that many of the numbers greater than 100, so this search is failed. Okay, so far we are seeing the examples on how we can doing the iteration through the list. Well, but the basic syntax is the same. So for I in AA, or for I in X, or for I in X. So this syntax is definitely good, and this is very handy. However, there are other possible ways. Okay, so before I show you other possible ways to iterate through a list, let me remind you again on three ways that we can visit a string character by character. The first one, X is Python, so that is string. And then for item in X, that is the most the most common way, and then we have been using that in the examples we have just seen, right? And the next one, for I in range of the length of the X, and then we are printing X square bracket I. We are using this I as a index. So this is the second way. So the first one, we are visiting this string with item as a control variable. But for this one, I is a control variable, and I'm using I as what? As an index, right? And then the third way, we can do the same. We can do the almost the same thing, but we can use a while loop. That is, I started I from 0, and then I, as long as I is smaller than the length of the X, I'm still using this I as a index. And remember, you have to increase the I by 1 by yourself. Okay, so in the first version and the second version, you don't have to worry about increasing 1 to the control variable. However, if you are using a third way with a while, you do have to do the manual update of the I by yourself. Okay, so those are the three ways that we can visit a string character by character. Okay, now let me do this change. Oops, come on. Okay, so I just changed this X to a list. Okay, and then take a look on the first version. That is exactly the way we have seen that we use to we can visit all the values, all the objects in a list, right? We have seen this syntax. And how about the second one? The second one, we are using I as an index, and now for each of the member, I'm going to do X square bracket I. So this one is another good version we can use if we want to visit all the values one by one in the list. And then how about the next version? I didn't change anything, and this is also good. Okay, I'm still using I as the index, and then as long as I is smaller than the length of the X, I can use the I as the index, and remember, I have to increase the I by myself. Okay, three versions. We can use three versions of the iteration to visit all the characters in a string. We can also use that to visit all the members in a Python list. Okay, so you are expected to know all those three different versions of the iterations. Okay, and then here is another example. Well, we want to consider this. Just now, for all the possible versions, all the three versions, our goal is we want to visit this list from the very beginning to the very end, right? So we want to see all the values. However, this may not really be true in all the cases. In some of the cases, in say, we only want to see the first n values, or we only want to see the last n values, or we want to see the middle n values. And how do we do that? Well, we have to change change the code a little bit. So for example, if we only want to get the sum of the first 5 value in the list, how do we do that? There are 10 values, there are 9 values in the list. However, I only care about the sum of the first 5 values. How can I do that? Then we can use a definite iteration because we want the iteration to run for 5 times, right? So for I in the range of 5, and then in the range of 5, what do we have? We have 0 to 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And what are they? They are the indexes of the first 5 value, and they are exactly what we are looking for, right? Okay, so if we are doing for I in the range of 5, and then we are iterating from 0 to 4, and then for each of the value, I'm using the I as the index, grab the value, and then add that to the sum. And ta-da! After this iteration, I got the sum of the first 5 value. Okay, so well, when you are doing the iteration on the list, and sometimes you do want to be a little bit flexible, that's the reason that I'm saying for all those 3 versions of the iterations, you have to be ready to write any version of them. Because say for this version, I have to use the second version of the iteration and modify the code to make sure it only runs for 5 times, right? Okay, and then the next thing I want to talk about how we can change a list, and say we have a list, and then all the members in the list are integers, and for each of the value I want to increase the value by I, and I is its own index, right? So this is index 0, so 1 increase another 0, that is still a 1. But for this one, the index 1 and the value is 2. So 2 increased by 1, we got a 3, right? And then 3, it has the index of 2. So 3 increased by 2, we have 5. So how do we do that? We are updating the values in the list now, right? So, well, for the iteration, there's nothing surprising. I'm using the second version here. Remember, I'm using the second version here, and then for I in the range of the length of x, right? So, for I in the range of the length of the x, and then for each xi, that is the x with the I as the index, I'm touching a specific value in the list. And what do? For each value xi, I'm adding an I value to that. So xi plus equals I. Okay? And then you may say, how can we do that with the third version? So the third version is almost the same thing. So I started from 0, and as long as I is smaller or equal to the length of the x, and then this line of code is exactly the same as this line of the code. However, remember, you have to increase the I by yourself. Okay? So, well, if you take a look again on those 2 versions, and then let me go back. They are exactly the version 2 and the version 3, right? So I'm using the version 2 and the version 3 to do the same task. And you may ask, can we do that with the first version of the iteration? So what was the task? The task was for each value I'm adding the index value to the corresponding value. Okay, like for this one, this is the index 0. So for the 1, I want to plus a 0 to that. Or this 5 has the index to be a 4, so I'm increasing the 5 by 4. And my question is, I have shown you I can do that with the second version and the third version of the iteration, and can I do that with the first iteration? For the first iteration, I mean this version. Can I do that? The answer is no, we can't. Because why? In the first version, we don't have the access to the index, right? So, okay, let me give you another example. For example, hey, I want to do my list equals 88.5, and 7 and 4 and -10. Okay, and then if I want to do for I in the range of the length of my list, and then I can print say on index comma I there is value colon comma my list with square bracket I. Okay, so let me show you this code, and I'm using I as a index, right? And then for I in the range of the length of the my list, and then I'm outputting both the index and the value on that index. So there's nothing surprising. I'm using the second version of the iteration, which is this one, right? And then if I want to run that, okay, I got on the index 0, there's value 88.5. On the index 1, there is value 7. Okay, and say if I want to do that with the first version of the iteration, which is for I in my list. Okay, now how can I do the same thing? I want to print on index. And then what's the index? That's a problem, right? So here I don't really have the index in this version. Well, if you really want to do that, and you have to go back and say, then you want to do a index tracker by yourself. Say index tracker equals 0. And then on index, comma, index tracker. And then we say there is value, colon, and then I. And then after each iteration, you do have to increase the index tracker by yourself. Okay, plus equals 1. Okay, so this is the this is the second way that we can iterate through a list. And for the first way, if you want to do that, the annoying thing is, my point is, we don't have the index. So you have to create an index tracker by yourself, and it's not really handy because this version looks even harder than this version, right? So even though if I want to run that, I'm gonna get exactly the same thing. This is the first version, this is the second version. However, using this one is not that handy. Why? Because we want to have the index and the value on that index at the same time. So this version is still okay, but this is not so handy anymore. Okay, so I think we have almost finished everything here, and for those two versions, and they will get the same result. And I will record one more video talk about today's exercise, and see you in the next video.